Alright, test. So, I'm gonna be spending a few minutes just reading some notes that I've taken in regards to period 3. So, I'm gonna start out with I'm not sure. I think I will begin with some identity, which is, I think, theme 1. So, for identity, America was very much founded on these, ideas and, rhetorical things of, freedom and justice and everything. But then, during this time, the American Revolution, and leading up to it, America notably had slaves. All sorts of people had slaves and kept slaves. So, leading up to the American Revolution, there was a bit of an irony, I guess, in that. And then, once the revolution occurred, a few states created their own constitutions and decided to not include slavery, like Vermont and Massachusetts. They just abolished it from the get-go. And it was clear that in the North, after the Revolution, slavery was sort of disappearing, but in the South, it was absolutely not. Some other identity-related things. After the Revolution, Americans were obsessed with the idea of, tyranny and plots for tyranny. Basically because, Britain was very tyrannical, so America was very fearful of having to go through that experience again. And when the British, put in acts like the Stamp Act, and they did things like the Boston Massacre, Currency Act, Sugar Act, Quartering Act, Intolerable Acts, Revenue Act, Indemnity Act, Customs Act, Admiralty Court Act. All these things kind of violated ideas that America had sort of just existed on, kind of like wordless agreements that they would generally get the freedom to do what they wanted, and Britain decided to invalidate that. So all of these sudden things the Americans really didn't like, and that was a big part of their identity with things like the Boston Tea Party and tarring and feathering. And then after the Revolution, there was a clash between Federalists and Anti-Federalists. And then, for fun, we can get into work exchange and technology. So before and during the Revolution, women played a huge part in American society. So this also fits under culture and society. So the war was home front. It was fought on American soil by all the men. So all the men were busy and couldn't do any work. So it was up to women to do work. So if not for women, the men would have come back from their war and had nothing. So the whole American Revolution and everything is just centered around women participating, and women produced clothing for the soldiers, they raised funds for the war, they went door to door and collected materials, they were critically important, they took care of farms and businesses, very important, as I was saying. Let's see what else I have here. For migration and settlement. After the war, Americans were very antsy, and the guy in Gilder Lehrman said they thought, well, what the heck do we do now? Which is accurate. They didn't know what to do with themselves particularly. So, they decided to try and expand their territory. They got Vermont to become a state in 1791, Kentucky in 1792, and Tennessee in 1796. During this time, slavery was still a thing, so whether or not to have slavery in these states was a big issue, obviously, which was very political. Let's not get into that yet. So for migration and settlement, America clashed with Native Americans, and they clashed with Europeans who laid claim to territory that they also laid claim to. By they, I mean the Americans. I find that noteworthy. So their whole idea of expanding brought them clashes, but they also gained new territory. Let's see. Got another minute or so, I think. So another thing that would be good to discuss, since it's kind of confusing, would be Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. So I think Federalists were sort of the more intelligent and researched party. They had papers like after the Revolution, the Great War. They were essentially nationalists, and they believed in the idea of America as a nation. So they met together and they wrote the Articles of Confederation, and they labeled the Anti-Federalists as the Anti-Federalists, which sort of put them at odds because nobody wanted to be the anti-party because it kind of made them seem at a disadvantage. So the Federalists and Anti-Federalists agreed on one thing, which was that the Articles of Confederation had to be improved and strengthened, because even though Anti-Federalists didn't particularly want to be a nation, the Articles of Confederation as a governing force seemed like a good idea that they wanted to have. So they went along with that, and that sort of weakened their argument, because not only were the Federalists knew what they were talking about more, so the Anti-Federalist argument was a lot less successful. And the reason the Federalists knew what they were talking about was because they met in conventions, and the Anti-Federalists were just sort of people from states who didn't really know each other, but they didn't really know what to do. So their big argument was that the Articles of Confederation had no Bill of Rights, so it could get in there with a tyranny conspiracy. But that was not accurate, that there would be tyranny. And they also argued about how the Federalists met in secret to accomplish their goals, which is correct. But they weren't doing any conspiring or anything. 1 second. Anyway, as I was saying, my dog. The Federalists ultimately had the stronger case because the only reason there was no Bill of Rights was because they didn't want to do it, because they had already spent 4 months writing all their declarations and articles and everything. So they just weren't super into the idea of spending another 2 months coming up with that yet. But they did, and then it was fine, I think. You know, that's why there's the 10 amendments. Initially, the 10 amendments are essentially the rights of the people. Wow, I went 8 minutes without coughing. Alright. I'm trying to think if I have other things that are relevant. In terms of slavery, which kind of goes into America and the world, back to slavery again, American slaves were offered freedom in 2 different ways. If they fought for the British, they were offered freedom. If they fought for the Americans, they were offered freedom. So a lot of slaves fought for either the British or the Americans, and due to this, a lot of slaves were freed, and the War for Independence resulted in the most slaves ever just being freed from one event in American history, except for the Civil War, or until the Civil War, you could say. And I find that very interesting. I think I've said just about everything. Yeah, pretty much. That's it. Bye. Give it like 10 more seconds. That's it.